I'm going to say it.
What's it like to fight someone who wants to fight to the death?
It is going to be 10x what they did to us on October 7th.
That they plan to do suicide bombings here.
How are you going to assault that?
They're here to do the attack and they're here to die, right? There's no exit plan.
An incident where groups of 8 to 10 well-trained terror operatives donned first responder uniforms. How would we handle in this county an incident where groups of 8 to 10 well-trained terror operatives donned first responder uniforms? How would we handle that as a community? Wow. How would we communicate that to the community? How would first responders actually talk to themselves on the fact that that was happening? And is there a way that they could overcome that with a different uniform or something? Like, I don't know the answer, but that is a legitimate question, right? Another question that came up a lot that I think is really powerful is how would our community to respond if the terror attack happened in such a way that there was complete paralysis across all first responders? If you had systemic paralysis in all of my case study interviews, you had systemic paralysis for at least 24 to 48 hours where there was no real response. So
why was that?
Well, because they were just overwhelmed. In some cases they were targeted. In October 7, first responders, they ran right at them and they took them out. And so they were not, and then you had reinforcements coming. There was so much confusion. Plus you had the terror groups actually in first responder uniforms, right? So it was just complete chaos. And so and then some areas were cut off where they held terrain. Like in Mumbai, they held terrain. In Bedouin School, they put basketball goals with explosives on them and the children in the middle. How are you going to assault that? So these are the things that just by looking at the scenarios, it's just, you know what it is? It's so hard to look at, in my assessment. I mean, I was sitting across from this Special Forces soldier who responded to October 7, and he could barely form a coherent sentence. He was so upset. And this is a guy that's been operating for decades, and he couldn't even speak because of what he'd seen. It's so hard to look at. But honestly, I don't know how we can avoid that, but if we can start to derive some really, really poignant questions. And we put a ton of them in the book. But those are some of the ones that came up.
Yeah, and some other really interesting points is, right, we know at least from the training in Afghanistan what pieces of it'll look like, right? So there's one piece kind of also pulled from Mumbai is the idea of these like attackers who fight to the death, right? Because it's not like in Israel, you'll go and do an attack, you can grab, kidnap someone and leave and go back into Gaza. When they come in the United States, they're here to do the attack and they're here to die, right? There's no exit plan, right? So now we need to talk to law enforcement, like, what's it like to fight someone who wants to fight to the death? And how do we learn that? Okay, we go into our community, we talk to people who fought in Ramadi, in Fallujah, bring them in, have them talk, be consultants, advisors, tell us what it was like to fight that enemy. We can do that. Another really big piece is suicide bombers, right? That they plan to do suicide bombings here. Well, what do we need to learn about suicide bombings? Because we don't have suicide bombings in our community, even simple things. What kind of standoff should we just have from a metal detector? We should start those standoffs now, right? Because then if the bomber gets freaked out, blows up, you save lives just by putting a standoff going up to the metal detector. So if we start understanding these things, we can put little things in place that do save lives.
And I interviewed several intelligence analysts from the IDF, and I just asked them, at the end, I said, what would you say to American analysts, law enforcement? And 4 separate ones that I interviewed, they all, first of all, they sat there for like an uncomfortable period of time. Like you could tell they were wanting to say something, and then finally they were just like, fuck it, I'm gonna say it. And what they said was essentially, we live this every day. Like we live this in our communities. We're always facing this imminent threat. It's something that we've kind of come to terms with. And we were completely caught off guard. Like we were not ready for this. We were not ready for what came our way. And they came across, they came across the border, and then they went back. They said to me, you all have not even allowed yourself to even think about this. They have been among you for 4 years. It is going to be 10x what they did to us on October 7th. To the man and the woman, they said that. And they all were separate interviews.
Wow.
And when Al Qaeda planned this, remember the Hamas attacks they were involved in planning, they planned the U.S. homeland attack to be 10 times the size of the Hamas attacks. To them, the Hamas attacks was the dress rehearsal. So we have to remember the attack on us is going to be a lot larger.
And again, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I really do, but it's just all of the different points. It's the different points of interviews that I've conducted, including with these case studies. And if you even just consider the fact that one law enforcement officer does a lot of tactical training around the country, he watches your show diligently, and he contacted me and he said, Scott, I train all over the country. I train SWAT teams, advanced tactics. He said, I'm telling you right now, we're not ready for this in terms of response, primarily because the typical scenario that we deal with are single shooters.
Yep, one active shooter.
We do not deal with teams of 8 to 10 that are prepared to fight to the death. In Mumbai, for example, in 2008, there were 35 candidates that tried out that were initially groomed for the role. 10 were selected. 9 of the 10 fought to the death. They knew that they were not coming out, right? And so we've just never faced anything with that. And then if you look at, for example, the Crocus City Music Hall or the Crocus Music Hall just recently, where ISIS hit in Russia, that was a complex attack where they had incendiary devices. They set the place ablaze. They were extremely well armed with long guns and short guns, grenades, and they were taking the time to cut throats as they went, and making sure that it was covered and amplified. So you're talking about extremely well-trained individuals who are prepared to die and who frankly know what they're doing. And we don't think about that. We don't train that way. And I'm not saying that to create panic. I'm saying that's just a pragmatic responsibility that in this day and age that we live in, and particularly considering our border's been open for 4 years, how could we assume that has not happened? I mean, even if you didn't have the GWAT veteran reporting that you have, knowing the mandate that groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda have against our, demise, like, why would we not assume that number of people are here prepared to do that? I mean,
we've seen how effective the training is. I mean, the last time Sarah was on, she gave us a clip. We'll roll it again right now. But I mean, in my 14 years of being over there, I've never seen a combatant move like that or shoot like that. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, and then another really interesting thing when he brings up the ISIS Russia attack. So they trained multiple teams for that attack. And like the first team essentially got thwarted and wrapped up. So the Russians thought they stopped the plot. And then those guys came in and basically did that attack, which is very smart. And we're not used to those kind of tactics. Backup teams for these plots. Like that's a new thing. So we can even have people in the government, and we do have people like, they picked up like 8 ISIS guys last year and think they thwarted the homeland plot. So the terrorists are also doing things to make you think, okay, you're ahead of the game. You stopped this. And then they had a whole backup team that went in and successfully did that attack.
And I think you have to think about, I'll just say this real quick. It's just, we have to assume, I think another thing is strategic surprise. If you look at, if you just study these groups, they are very good at not just tactical surprise, but strategic surprise, where they surprise the nation. They surprise the larger body at scale. And when that happens, what follows is a level of institutional paralysis. Everything's locked, everything's paralyzed, and so when that happens, you've got these groups that are capable of what my buddy Dave at the agency calls not terrorism, but horrorism. Like they're able to bring a level of just unmitigated horror at an interpersonal level, and then they'll even amplify it with body cams.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.